Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Tukwula's Town Hall event. We have two final candidates that will be participating in this evening's virtual community town hall event. They will both give a 15-minute presentation back to back, and then we will enter into a moderated question and answer session that you'll be able to ask questions through the question and answer tab, the Q&A tab that you have available to you. If you are calling in on the phone, we ask that you please email tukwila@tukwila.gov if you have any questions, and then we will send your question. We ask that for everyone's respect during this process, all voices will be heard. That being said, we want to also ensure that any questions that are asked are appropriate questions, for our two final candidates. And so please just, please have some respect for the process as we move forward with this. Again, we really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy days to be here this evening. I'd like to quickly introduce our candidates, and then they will obviously take a couple minutes to introduce themselves with their presentations. I will start with our interim chief, Eric Drever. Eric Drever is our interim chief, excuse me. And he's one of our finalists. Say hi real quick, Chief Drever.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And we also have Major Michelle Bennett, who is our other finalist. If you just want to say a quick hello.
Hello.
Thank you. And so for the presentations that we're going to start off with, we are going to start off with Major Bennett's presentation first, and then we'll transition into Chief Drever's presentation. Just give us a couple minutes to get the presentations queued up, and we will go ahead and start. I will pass it off to you, Major Bennett.
Okay. Can you see that okay?
Okay. Yes.
Yep.
And hear me okay?
Okay.
Yes.
I will begin. Hello, my name is Michelle Bennett, and a little bit about my background. I grew up in Washington State, actually in Eastern Washington. Moved over here during high school, finished some schooling in Central Washington University, and then my education doctorate in Seattle Pacific University. I was the police chief for the city of Maple Valley for almost 10 years, and then the chief of police for the city of Sammamish for 3 years, a little over 3 years. And I've been a captain and sergeant and major with the King County Sheriff's Office. I teach classes part-time for the School of Police Staff and Command, the FBI National Academy. That's a little bit of historical background, and for those perhaps not familiar with contract cities, both Sammamish and Maple Valley are contracts with the King County Sheriff's Office. So for 31 years almost now, I had worked for the King County Sheriff's Office. And I retired about 3 weeks ago, but retirement didn't last very long. And in my life, I have my 4 beautiful children, and I enjoy soccer and hiking and gardening. So part of my time with Sammamish Police and with Maple Valley Police and the King County Sheriff's Office is I was able to be a part of a number of committees, including the president of the King County Chiefs Association and currently the president of the FBI National Academy Washington State Executive Board and vice president of the Northwest Women's Law Enforcement Network. I also served on the Washington State Legislative Committee for the Washington State Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Conference and was liaison for many years for our Youth Explorer program. So I'm going to get on to the questions now for the forum, which national and local racial reckoning or calls for reform in law enforcement. How would you build bridges between law enforcement and the diverse Tukwila community? What does it look like? And in sum, and I'm going to go through this with my answer, building a strong and healthy community through collaboration, partnerships, ownership, and leadership based on enhanced communication and effective collaboration. So in order to accomplish that mission that was just stated, it's important to have a direction, so clearly defined goals and missions and performance measures. It's important to have policy, to develop, update, and refine policies and procedures within the department, as well as ordinances. It's important to increase citizen involvement. I'll talk about some of these community programs in a minute, neighborhood, block, and business watch, volunteer programs, and of course, National Night Out Against Crime. Working with efficiency for alternative call handling, the best way to handle calls with the community, whether that's in person, by phone, or virtual. And of course, that all ties in with the improved use of technology and data. Training is important for accomplishing this mission, strategies to achieve the goal of racial justice and of building trust with the police department. It's important to ensure multidiscipline and jurisdictional planning and exercises, so we utilize resources of our neighboring agencies and work in collaboration with them. It's important to address citizen complaints and to query citizen satisfaction and ratings from our community. And it's important for effectiveness to assess outcomes of goals and objectives in our performance measures. So there should be systemic, formal problem-solving tracking. It's also important to ensure proper equipment is provided for high-risk responses for our officers. It's important to conduct reviews of high-risk responses and activities to make sure we're in compliance with all state legislation, with our policies and procedures and our training. And it's important to look into performance measures and make sure that they're in, good hands with your chosen manager. Those are powerful drivers of change. They link the use of resources and allow the department to meet service demands by looking into community resources and measuring outcomes. So question 2, how do we build trust with the community, some of whom fear law enforcement, while also understanding that police officers are experiencing an all-time low in morale and job satisfaction? And how do we intend to address this in a way that restores pride in the workforce and improves the department's relationship with the community? So the first answer in that is developing innovative strategies through collaborative planning, program development, advocacy, and public education. And that ensures and encourages supportive, effective, cohesive partnerships that mobilize and use and collaborate with the existing expertise and services in and around the Tukwila community. So in building trust, part of that with racial justice and equity has to do with acknowledging that there's been a problem, the systemic and cultural tensions and issues historically, looking at the disproportionality of arrest, looking to continue educational programs for the community and department members. And it's very important to collaborate with our community groups, our community panels, to again look at review, revisit, revise policies and training for 21st century policing, and to assess alternatives and ensure implementation of these programs. And it starts at the top. So I think with accountability and transparency and building trust, it's important to tell it early, tell it all, and tell the truth. That accountability and transparency really starts with civilian engagement and making sure that we have appropriate civilian engagement and oversight. We need to continue to involve and invite neighborhood groups and councils to the table, including the great programs with the Community Connections, Tukwila Human Services providers, and the Community Resource Guide. We need to provide education and training to civilians and to the department. I think it's important that both entities understand the role and what we should be doing and how we best serve. So for racial justice, I think one of the things we have to look at is how we move forward. What do we do with the discomfort? How do we consider bias? How do we address unconscious bias? And that all starts at hiring and education and training with our workforce. And it's important to hire that diversity in our workforce. And for us individually, we need to reflect, engage, understand, have that courage, and practice that intentionality in addressing bias. For racial injustice, there are a number of programs that can assist with addressing racial injustice. So there are many alternative programs to address disproportionality of communities of color, looking at how we implement charges, looking at things as simple as driving while suspended. Should that be a civil crime? Should that be a misdemeanor where folks are put in jail? How do we implement strategies? And there's myriad strategies out there of alternative programs to ensure compliance and safety, but without being punitive or further damaging the community. It's important to engage with the community and partner with other agencies and come up with those innovative and creative approaches to building community programs and relationships. Now is really the time in law enforcement to seize the opportunity to be transformative and to establish roles within the public and that community collaboration. It really is truly ripe now for a radical reimagination and transformation in law enforcement. And I think that takes some fresh perspective and understanding the pulse of the community. And again, utilizing partners for a collaborative response to implement those alternative solutions and changes and to understand our roles. So to build community trust and buy-in, it's important to have these partnerships with the community. It's important for partnerships with the school district. We need to address immigration concerns, questions, and fears. Look into addressing and collaborate with community services, continuing community academies, hosting panels, summits, and forums when there are community concerns, and bringing that trust and accountability to the police department while collaborating with our citizens. In the previous cities where I served as chief, in both of those communities, we had something that was called Healthy Communities Coalition. Most recently, I started this in Sammamish, and it was taking all the 501c3 nonprofits. There were myriad nonprofits, over 40 of them that were serving the community I last worked in as chief, and many of them didn't have a means of communication with each other, or they had similar purposes and were duplicating efforts. So with the Healthy Communities Coalition, we took all of those entities, as well as faith-based groups, citizen councils, community councils, the city itself, the library, the fire department, even Puget Sound Energy. They all came together to talk about issues with our community and what we can all do to address specific problems. And specifically with that, we were able to look at a number of problems facing the community, and some of that had to do with education and training about cultural bridges and assault and vandalism and building those bridges within the community. Also hosting a chiefs panel, looking at and enhancing and planning for the next 5-year strategic plan, having an outward-facing, transparent use of force complaint dashboard so the public can see the results of our use of force complaints. Education regarding transparency includes our body cams, dash cams, public-facing dashboards, and involving community councils to enhance community liaison programs. And I think really it comes down to, in the bottom line, just engaging and really listening. Now is the time to listen to our community. Oftentimes we come in with all of our ready-made solutions, and yet I think the most important thing is to listen to what the community wants from us and what we can do for the community. Some previously successful programs that I've worked with include a number of these that I won't read off. But again, with the Healthy Communities Coalition, we did a lot with youth engagement. We had a youth panel. We talked about dating violence, drug and alcohol effects. My last assignment, we implemented the Safe Place program for the LGBTQ community or immigrant community. We hosted immigration panels, attended the Muslim Safety Forum, and really worked on building cultural bridges through some of our police programming. So in order to take department morale, the second part of that question, and meet community expectations, I think it's important to design and implement and write a 3, 6, and 12-month goal and plan. It's important to evaluate and assess those outcomes, kind of a do it, get it done kind of person, and make sure that we assess and evaluate and see what we need to change. It's important to get officer buy-in and to sit with officers and do that goal setting together so that there is buy-in and it is a collaborative effort. It's important to also reimagine, be thoughtful, be strategic in working together for these collaborative efforts to build community trust. What are the things we should be doing? What are the things that maybe we shouldn't be doing anymore? What does the community expect from us? In all of the discourse and dialogue, talking about policing and the pendulum swinging this way or that way, I don't think it's mutually exclusive what the community wants from us and what we want to do for the community. We want to serve, and I think the community wants to be served. So I think we need to have those dialogues and that conversation, and that will help us find those thoughtful results and alternatives for previous problems that just had band-aids on them. And really engaging that community and building that trust helps with crime prevention as well. So I think we have a great department. It's cool. I think we need to build on that great department. We need to thoughtfully address, again, alternatives to systemic issues, and we need to impact that law enforcement disproportionality. We have to be present with our communities, our council, our directors, the department members. We have to reimagine and be thoughtful and effective with how we implement safe policing. It's important that we build that community trust, that accountability, that transparency. I think Sir Robert Peel said in 1829 with the Metropolitan Police Act, the police are the public and the public are the police. It's one and the same. So we have to build trust together. There's not these walls and these sides. It's a collaboration together to address what we all want, which is service, safety, public safety, and making sure that our kids, can go out at night and feel safe in their neighborhoods. So in conclusion, when we're talking about building officer morale, it's a difficult time for many in law enforcement, but I don't think new legislative attempts or things that are happening really change the course of why, you know, we got into law enforcement in the first place, which was to protect and serve and to help our community. And I think by and large, that's why law enforcement officers join. I think we have to have a collaborative approach between command staff, our mid-level managers, and our first level supervisors and our department members. And I've spent a lot of time working on programs that deal with workplace respect and civility and workplace respect and civility policies internally. And I think those things naturally migrate externally as well. So I think ensuring that internal culture that's positive, that's looking at how we can do things better versus, oh, we can't do that, and really engaging the community in our responses would be extremely helpful. Enhancing and utilizing our current resources and partnerships. There's a lot of other agencies out there. And in my previous agency, I was a liaison with many of those agencies, and I think it's just adding to best practices and how we can serve our community. A quality circle is something where members of the department can bring ideas, thoughts, how to better effectively use a budget, problems within the agency, and that will help the officers bring that forward in order to address those issues in that quality circle to make the most quality, effective, and efficient use of resources. It's important to institute and fund a wellness and resiliency policy for officers and to have that focus and training. My previous work within the sheriff's office, one of the last things besides writing our business and operations plan and working on our 5-year strategic plan was writing our wellness and resiliency policy. And I think there are many programs that can assist officers in that wellness focus. And I think when we have that internal culture and wellness and morale, it naturally morphs into collaboration and community trust. So the final thing would be communicating well, early and often with the department members. So in closing, thank you for giving me this time for the presentation, and I will turn it back over to Juan.
Thank you, Major Bennett. I appreciate that. So right now what we'll do is we'll take a brief, quick moment and queue up Chief Drever's slides. Once we do that, I will hand it over to Chief Drever.
Just checking if they've been queued up yet. I can't see the screen.
They are
Here
queued.
you go, Chief.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for having me and giving us an opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Tukwola's interim chief of police, Eric Drever. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I began my law enforcement career as a reserve officer for Mukilteo before I came to Tukwila, where I've been serving the department and community for the last 27 years. And this is where I plan to finish my law enforcement career, as I'm committed to both the department and community. I just don't see myself working anywhere else. I've had an opportunity to work with every division and almost every unit within the department, including a short stint as the records manager and also the interim TIS director for the city. I've also worked closely with the community and other city departments, helping change the very face of the city, making it safer, specifically International Boulevard over the years and the crime reductions that we've seen there. These experiences give me a unique perspective on how our department has served the Tukwila community and how we can continue to improve on that service. So the city's asked us to discuss the following, specifically referring to building bridges and trust with the community, looking to address morale and the restoration of pride in the department, and all done in a way that improves the department's relationship with the community. So I thought I'd start with morale and restoring pride. In our department, in talking with the members, we've continued to be proud about the work that we do and the service that we provide on a daily basis. However, we can strengthen that pride with renewed efforts and support for the department and the administration by working with the community to meet their needs. Because I believe honestly that if we're going to be restoring pride, or that we're not restoring pride, we need to first if we're going to be looking at providing exemplary service for Tukwila, we need to make sure that we have a sound, healthy work environment for the people that work for the police department. Because if we can provide a healthy work environment for them, it provides greater opportunities for us to commit to the community. So in our nation right now, we're seeing narratives about law enforcement that are eroding the trust of our community. Even though we're a team that supports one another, our support operations specialists, our commissioned officers, including our administration, work together. It is our officers that are drawing the scrutiny of the issue of trust, and therefore, I'm going to take a moment to quickly focus on them. This badge is a symbol of pride that we all share for the work that we do. The day that I personally got my badge pinned on, I took pride in knowing that the Tukwila community had bestowed its trust in me to carry out one of the most difficult tasks of serving the community as a police officer. I take pride in the badge and the profession that I've chosen every time I put on the badge. I know that the rest of the department feels similarly. So our morale did take a hit over the last year with everything that's been going on, where that trust has been questioned. However, we moved through the year, it was apparent that we still had the trust of the Tukwila community at large, regardless of what was happening on the rest of the nation. And our morale rebounded. We in some of the community still have lingering concerns, but the department as a whole is internally healthy as it relates to morale. But that doesn't mean everything is perfect and not everyone is happy. But through constant communication with its members in the department, and both individually and with the labor organizations, we can continue forward and thrive as a team. Having been a part of labor leadership and the administration, I bring a unique perspective to addressing the issues that impact morale. Over the same years I've been working here, the concerns tend to have the same great impacts, and it's the same concerns on morale that have been expressed by labor over the years. The members of the Tukwila family want fairness and equity with the way that they're treated and with the decisions that get made. They've talked about having the support of their administration from the city and from the community. They need to draw job satisfaction from the work they do. But most important to morale is communication. Nothing can destroy morale faster than the lack of information or false information that spreads. Therefore, constantly keeping the members of this department apprised of the department goals and the operations that help us attain those goals is critical. And then finally, the final piece of that puzzle for our morale is specifically officer wellness. Making sure that our staff have the resources they need to lead a healthy personal and professional life. And again, if we take care of the members of our department, they in turn will be in a better position to serve this community. That's why we put into place resiliency training, peer support programs, organization of the resiliency and peer support through a phone app, providing facilities for taking care of fitness, and providing sincere support from their administration. Once the members of our department are taken care of, it opens the doors for engaging with the community at higher levels of service. Because if an officer or specialist is secure in their own wellness, they're able to focus even more intently on addressing the concerns of the community. We still have a way to go with our wellness program. However, we've put together a team that addresses the needs of our department, and I trust in them as our subject matter experts to elevate our wellness program even further. So again, I do not believe that we need to restore pride in this department, but we should always be looking for better ways and for us to be able to strengthen that pride. Which brings us to the current state of trust with the Tukwila community. Trust begins with the department. We must create transparency in a way that we conduct ourselves and in the way that we hold ourselves accountable. I've been working within the region and state to help provide that transparency and accountability for law enforcement, specifically as it relates to the officer-involved use of deadly force in law enforcement independent investigations. Building a regional independent investigative team that is now recognized in the state as the model to follow for independent investigations. I've brought the ideas from that specific involvement to Tukwila. I've brought that same transparency and accountability. We've established a use of force review board utilizing community members. We're moving forward with utilizing community members with our hiring practices, having them sit in on our interviews to provide input. And more recently, working with the Criminal Justice Training Commission to implement active bystandership for law enforcement, the ABLE project. Tukwila already has an intervention policy, which is what the ABLE project is about. However, the ABLE project creates a culture of accountability around that intervention. It prevents misconduct, it avoids mistakes, and it promotes officer wellness all at the same time. However, with building trust, it takes working on our relationships, which can only be done through communication. More than just talking, it means truly engaging with the community at all levels. Fortunately, we're already proud of the engagement that we've been involved in with the community, even during a time of the pandemic. We need to make ourselves available. We need to ask our community members what they want in their police department. To that effect, I've been working with our Community-Oriented Policing Community Advisory Board, COPCAB, to put out a survey that asks for feedback from the community that will allow us to better meet the community needs. We're still in negotiations, or I should say discussions, about exactly how long that survey should go on, because we want to be able to get live, real-time communications and feedback from the community so that we can better address your needs. Further, we need to nurture the relationships that we have while still building new relationships. We need to educate both the public and law enforcement on that engagement and reach out to the leaders that are representative of our diverse community, which begins with our faith leaders. Here's just a sample of several of our engagement programs that we're currently involved in. These become the base for us to then grow further engagement efforts. Our Theft, Third, and Mall Safety, our team's diversion program for youth. It's designed around shoplifting and making sure youth don't enter the justice system. Law Enforcement Training and Community Safety Act, which is what I've been involved with on the regional and state level for bringing transparency and accountability through legislation into our department so that we are transparent. The training it also provides as it relates to crisis intervention and de-escalation. Social interactions through coffee with a cop, shop with a cop, touch a truck, night out against crime are all ways for us to socially engage and get to know each other. We've established our Community Police Academy. This last year we weren't able to put it on, but now we're looking for innovative ways of making sure we can put it on via remotely and using Teams and or social media for us to be able to carry out the academy. Community forums like Town Hall, we put into our budget into the fall as one of our indicators of success, having community forums so that we can engage just like this, being able to field questions and engage with the community, especially right now during a time of COVID and a pandemic when it makes us engaging and meeting face to face that much more difficult. One specific thing put into the budget as it relates to those community forums is specifically related to the youth and making sure that the youth of Tukwila also have the same opportunity to engage with the police department and for us to be able to hear their concerns and address them. For those of you that are on our social media with Facebook and Twitter, we're doing a better job over the last couple months of making sure that we're putting out informational posts that inform you about how we do our work. Again, all as a means for being more transparent. Our homeless engagement and resources, as well as our co-responder programs. Specifically, we have a co-responder program that we're working out with a local health provider here in the city to help with the Tukwila, have a program specifically for Tukwila, as well as we're working regionally, and we've partnered with other chiefs in the valley for putting together for acquiring a grant that would allow us to have a secondary co-responder program and have mental health practitioners and navigators that can deploy into the field with law enforcement. So moving forward, this is going to take a 5-year strategic plan with specific focus on community engagement, law enforcement wellness, implementation of reform and efficiency through technology. Specifically, as it relates to reform, we're all aware of the laws that are currently on the House and Senate floors as it relates to new bills that will impact how police work is done. It's going to take effort, education, training to make sure that we take the intent, not only the bills and the law, but take the intent behind them to try and best serve our community. And ultimately, communication. It all comes back to communication and making sure that we're engaging with the community. But what does that look like? For the department, it looks like caring. We care about this community. We care about the service that we provide. We care about each other. This is a partnership between the community and its law enforcement. And in order for this partnership to work, we need to listen to one another. The department specifically needs to follow through on what we're listening to with addressing the concerns that we hear from the community. This is your police department. The police department is a part of the community. I've spent over half my life serving the Tukwila community and the members of this department. I and this department have embraced the pillars of 21st century policing. We've put into place processes that create transparency and accountability, programs and culture that foster engagement with the community. Again, the Tukwila Police Department is a part of this community. I'm proud of what our department has already done to provide transparency and accountability for the Tukwila community and the engagement that meets the needs of both the department and the community together. I look forward to being able to work further with the Tukwila community and our department in trying to serve the needs of both the department and the community. And thank you. I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you, Major Bennett and Chief Drever. We are getting some questions coming in the chat box, and I appreciate that. We'll get to those here in a second. I do want to remind folks that called in, if you have questions, please email tukwila@tukwilawa.gov, and we'll get to those questions as you email them. I want to start off with a couple of questions for Major Bennett. I initially have 3 questions for you so far. I'll start off with one of those questions right now for you. I understand that you were the chief of police for Sammamish and Maple Valley. However, as you may already know, racial, social, and economic demographic compositions of these 2 cities are drastically different from Tukwila, as well as economic, social, and human service challenges. My question is, what type of approaches will you use to translate your policing experience at these more affluent and predominantly white cities in a way that can bring transformation to the policing in Tukwila?
Thank you. Fantastic question. Yes, those 2 communities were, I would say, definitely they were affluent, but also in Sammamish, Sammamish was 30% foreign-born or non-English speaking in the home, and I realize there's over 100 and some languages spoken in the Tukwila communities. I worked a lot with the school district specifically to work in their Issaquah Schools Foundation and Cultural Bridges programs, and sat on their equity committee with the school and the school board and concerned community members to address youth specifically and build those bridges between youth and family and the school district. In my career with the sheriff's office over the 30+ years, I worked a number of different communities other than just Sammamish and Maple Valley. I worked in White Center and Burien and Skyway, and also spent a lot of time on Highway 99, Aurora, in street crimes and a number of other positions. So I'm familiar with the myriad types of policing, and I think my experience just overall in the 30 years of law enforcement have led me to be able to work in and build collaborative responses and build community with all members of our citizenry and our community.
Thank you. I hope I get this right. I'm going to try to alternate questions. I have specific ones for each of the candidates. I will ask one now to you, Chief Drever. This is from one. I appreciate your service truly from all the positions you've held. Have you ever witnessed implicit and explicit racial biases in Tukwila PD? If so, what do you do about it? If not, tell me your understanding of what implicit bias is.
Well, actually, I can do both. I can tell you what my understanding of implicit bias is, which is we all have subconscious reactions, usually tied to stereotypes of how we mentally group people together. It's natural, we all do it. And where implicit bias really comes in is being aware of your own biases and not taking action based on those biases, truly evaluating your thought process as you make decisions. However, as it relates to whether or not I've actually witnessed implicit and or explicit bias, the answer is yes, I have. It's very rare that we see it as we're going about the actions of the police department. However, I have seen it. And in those incidents where it was blatantly obvious, and yes, we could label it as that, those individuals don't work for us anymore. The first time I truly experienced racial behavior by an officer, that officer was terminated. I was a commander at the time. I actually did the internal investigation on the decision making was not mine. And then more recently, as a deputy chief, I've witnessed it, and that employee does not work here anymore. So we address it. We hold ourselves accountable. We make sure that we are doing everything in our effort to make sure that we are transparent and communicating about what is going on. We don't hide it because that's what creates the distrust. So wherever we can, we expose it, because law enforcement doesn't want these things happening in law enforcement either. That's all we have as law enforcement as it relates to our ability to engage is our integrity. And as soon as that integrity is lost, the trust breaks down. That's why it's more important to be accountable. And when we make mistakes, own it. Or if we have people within our ranks that shouldn't be, we make sure that we address it.
Thank you, Chief Drever. Major Bennett, this is looks like a two-part question. I think there's a follow-up a little later down from the same person. But in your assessment, name specific missing opportunities that Tukwila PD is not even aware of connecting with the people, and two, what types of data would the public-facing dashboard display?
Good questions. For all police departments, anytime there are community events, community meetings, or any type of invitation, I think it's incumbent upon us to be present. And in the communities I've worked in the past, that availability, and not just hosting a meeting and asking people to come, it's building the relationship so that you're invited into meetings, that you go and can participate in community collaboration. So I think that the missed opportunities are not engaging where there is potential to engage. I used to go to homeowner association meetings, to block watch parties, to school carnivals. There are Rotary, Kiwanis, school district meetings, equity meetings, fear and immigration panels. There are so many opportunities to engage, and the missed opportunities are when we don't. We're busy. We have this going on. We have that going on. If there's any kind of vacuum or retirements or people not present, and they're not able to attend. And it's been difficult just in the pandemic as well, because most of the meetings now are virtual. So that face-to-face engagement is a little more difficult, but it's still possible. And those are still things that we should be engaging in. In my work with the strategic plan, right before I retired from the sheriff's office, I was building community surveys to engage communities specifically that had distrust of the police, that wanted to address what their concerns were or why they wouldn't call the police. And then your second question was, public or dashboards. So in our sheriff's office, we had a public-facing dashboard that you were able to look up as a citizen, to get into the dashboard and look up use of force events, and what happened with the use of force, if there's a complaint, and what the outcome was. And we were also working on adding internal complaints without providing confidential information, having a dashboard that you could look at an internal complaint, the synopsis of the complaint, what happened, what was the discipline. So it was building that transparency and accountability so that the community members were aware of, what was happening within the police department, and not just that, but closing that feedback loop of what we were doing about it and being open and transparent in that. And I think the most important thing leadership can do is to show up, even if it's uncomfortable, even if the questions are uncomfortable, even if it's difficult or the answers aren't immediate. It's important to be present and to listen. I think listening is probably the most important thing we can do.
Thank you, Major Bennett. I'm going to shift real quick. We did have one email question that came in. I want to make sure that we get to those as well. So this question is for both candidates. How have you engaged and how do you plan to engage with the disabled community? And I will start with Chief Reaver on this one.
Well, as it relates specifically to the, I apologize. Could you state the question again?
Yes, absolutely. The question is written as, how have you engaged and how do you plan to engage with the disability community?
So my engagements with the disability community began truly with the construction of the Justice Center and ADA compliance and making sure that we brought in a specialist so that we could meet those needs as it relates to being able to provide services out of the Justice Center. As it relates moving forward, it's our responsibility to make sure that we identify the different groups and needs within the community and then begin those engagement processes. Finding the leaders in those communities and those that are representing those with disabilities so that we can address the needs and how we provide that service. And then, like with any of the other communities or groups within our community, just making ourselves available and listening to what you have to say so that we can, again, meet those needs and concerns.
Thank you. Major Bennett?
The best example I can give for previous engagement had to do when I was a sergeant in the shoreline community. There's a complex there called Fircrest, which is specific to disabled community of in housing, counseling, residential, all within the parameters of this complex. And as a sergeant, I was able to liaison with some problems they were having there. Not only some crime problems, but also some internal problems with staff and building trust in community. So I went and met with the leaders of that entity and built that relationship to solve the issues that were at hand. I think to piggyback on what Interim Chief Deaver said, I think we have to seize those opportunities and we have to identify groups and we have to make sure that we respond when asked, and that we do the outreach piece as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Give me a quick second to move back over to the Q&A side. We have a follow-up question for you, Major Bennett, on your presentation. Let me make sure I'm answering the right question. Yes. What do you believe is the primary role of police in the community? I heard you say protect and serve, but I'm curious if you can be more specific about what it looks like to you. How is this different than the role that you currently see in Tukwila?
I think I answered this a little bit in a previous question, but I think that protect and serve is a piece of the core of why we're in law enforcement in the first place. And to dive down deeper, be more specific, I think the Healthy Communities Coalition is probably the best example of what that looks like, where you're taking all segments of society, all segments of our community, and our helping groups and disenfranchised groups and everyone that has that similar purpose, which is to be safe and to create a safe and welcoming community, a healthy community. And so engaging with all of the various partners in order to build that collaboration. And really what it's about, honestly, is building relationships. It was to the point when I left my last city that the imam of the mosque had my cell phone number and would call me at 10 o'clock at night with problems that they were having. And I think that building that trust is what was key to that relationship. It's being available and being within the community. And that's what I found in all the communities that I've been privileged enough to work in, is that by being present, by being engaged, by asking the questions, by answering the questions, by listening, you build such a relationship that people get to know the department. It's not just the chief, it's the entire department. And they build the trust and that recognition of the helping role of law enforcement and the helping role of the of the officers that are working in Tukwila. And once that is solidified and once that trust begins to be built by attending these meetings, by going to anything that you're invited to, by being open and honest and transparent, I think that builds that community relationship. And again, these are similar purposes from both the community and the police. We desire the same things. It's having that medium and communication in between to reach that goal together and to have that collaboration.
Thank you. Let me see here. Follow up for you, Chief Drever. I hear that you care about communication. That said, do you see racial and social equity assessment as a good and useful framework for more transparent communication? And then the follow on to that is, have you ever led or been a part of a racial or social equity assessment within the police department? And by assessment, I mean auditing current hiring policies, practices, and public input processes. Do you think it might be useful?
So just to answer the end question, yes, it's most definitely useful. I have been involved with some racial and social equity assessment, specifically as it relates to our hiring, making sure that we are trying to, similar to listening to the last question I was asked regarding implicit bias, making sure that we are not making decisions based on pre-concluded thoughts about individuals, making sure that we provide for a fair and equitable hiring practice. Aside from that, I haven't been involved personally with an actual audit of our processes and everything within the department. However, we can move forward with working with our city's Equity and Social Justice Committee to do just that. And part of that is going to be a part of that 5-year strategic plan, where we reach out to the community and hear from them these exact things and try and put them into practice, because that's what the community wants, and we can best represent those needs, very similar to what Michelle was just talking about, by listening to the community. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Drever. We have another question that came in from one of the callers, and I believe this is in reference to the survey you had discussed, Chief Drever, probably the one in CopCab. In regards to the outgoing survey, will it be translated into other languages, or will the Tukwila Police Department work with community-based organizations to help spread the word, particularly for our immigrant and refugee community?
Yes to both. So yes, we plan on having it translated into other languages so that we can hit the broad base of our community here within the city. This is a partnership with our CopCab, our Community-Oriented Policing Community Advisory Board. And together we'll probably release the first one in English so that we can actually get it out, because it's already done, it's already prepared. We're going through the vetting process, just making sure we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's as it relates to making sure we're meeting the needs and eliciting the information we want. And then once we've done that, we will translate that. And as we finish a translation, we will make sure we get that out to the public as well. So that's already in the works. Okay,
thank you. I have a couple of questions now for both candidates. We'll start with you, Major Bennett, on the first one, and then we'll flip-flop for the second one. So the first question is to you, for you, Major Bennett, is what are your views on the use and availability of body cam usage by officers? For example, cost and safety of officers and citizens.
So I've always been a proponent of body cams. The Sheriff's Office had never had them. When I first got to Maple Valley, I implemented a pilot program for a body camera and found out all the ins and outs of what's required, especially the technology pieces and the training. Right before I retired, I was responsible for drafting the King County Sheriff's Office body cam policy, since we're starting a pilot program this year. And in that, I researched policies nationwide, including the International Association of Chiefs of Police best practices policies. I've always been a proponent for them. I think having body cams or dash cams shows the event. I do think there were some concerns in the last process in writing the policy where communications maybe were captured that were not germane to an investigation, and is that going to be subject to public disclosure, and are we impeding privacy? So we added a piece of the policy that if not germane to the investigation and the witness or person that we're speaking with ask for the body cam to be turned off during the conversation because there's a threat or a fear or domestic violence or something like that, that the officer can turn the camera off by request and note that and document it in the case report. So I think there are some measures we could take to help ensure privacy, and I think that the cost, there is a cost, and it can be significant, but I think it provides true and accurate footage and visual of what the job is and what our officers have done. It protects the officers, and it also protects community members. So I think the cost is worth every penny. That's my view on body cams.
Thank you, Major Bennett. Chief Reaver?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Major Bennett. The cameras are vital moving forward for any law enforcement agency. However, there are issues related to logistics and implementation and cost. We've been able to overcome most of that. We've had both in-car and body-worn cameras since the end of 2016, I believe it was. We're among the first in the state to actually implement them. And so even though we've ironed out the kinks as it relates to a lot of policy and the usage of it, it's second nature now, and it's a part of our regular operations. The problem with the cost that comes in is not something that most people even think about. It's the back end. We now have terabytes of video and information and data that when a public disclosure request comes in and asks for all that, we have to go through and literally view hours of video to release. The public disclosure end is where the costs are for the camera, not the equipment. And so right now, our biggest cost and time commitment for the police department as it relates to public disclosure requests are the in-car cameras and body cameras. And so we're struggling to find staffing to be able to manage the demand for that. So it is critical that we keep such a program in place. It helps out both the community and those that are subjects of contacts with law enforcement, and it helps out law enforcement as well. So as it relates to moving forward with our body camera footage, we will always have it if we have the funding for do it, which we have the funding to keep the cameras. The funding issue then becomes public disclosure requests. And so we're working on finding a way to meet that need here in the city, not just for the police department, but public disclosure requests in general for the whole city.
Thank you, Chief Drever, and we'll stay with you, and you'll start off the next question for both candidates. Assuming you're selected for the role, what does your first 90 days look like?
Well, the first 90 days for us is establishing how we want to go out and engage the community. For instance, we mentioned the survey, putting together those community forums so that we can gather information that will allow us to then put into place a strategic plan moving forward. The police department just exhausted its 5-year strategic plan. That was created 5 years ago. We now need to take into consideration everything that's going on in not just the Tukwila community, but across the nation as it relates to law enforcement. We need to look at our core values and reassess, are these still the values that meet the needs of the community? Look at our mission statement. Establish what it is that the community needs by involving them and getting their input as we move forward. That's the first 90 days, aside from then reaching out to community, engaging with them so that we can understand what is it we can do for you, how can we best meet your needs. Then beyond that becomes implementation.
Thank you, Chief Drever. Major Bennett?
For a 90-day plan, I'm a big proponent of written plans with tasks and dates and who's going to do what by when. And that allows the implementation and also the evaluation later of what might need to be tweaked if we come back. I think in the first 90 days, a lot of it's getting to know the current state and then benchmarking where we are versus best practices. I think it's really important, and I had just completed one of these with our contract cities, to do a SWOT analysis, our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think it's important to engage the whole department and the community in that analysis, and that assists in driving the strategic plan, because I think the work to set about now that the strategic plan is expiring is the strategic plan in the coming 5 years. And I think that will look a little bit different than the previous one. I think it involves a lot more community engagement and gathering of information. And I think the community is a much bigger piece of that, especially alternative programs that we can implement. So the last piece of the first 90 days is making sure that there's a closing of the feedback loop of the 90-day plan with set goals for the department that are reached mutually through a goal setting process, and that the main tenets of what we're trying to do through that goal setting, and once we've established those goals, are stated clearly to the officers and staff and to the community. And then finally reporting out on those to the city council or town hall meeting or in a community forum, so that that feedback loop is closed.
Thank you, Major Bennett. We do have a question that came in from email. I want to ask that. And so I believe this is for both candidates here. And I think we're on to Chief Drever to start first on this one. Is how are you going to transform a culture that was created over the last 30 years, and why are citizens called civilians?
Why are citizens called civilians?
Yes, sir. That was the question.
I'm going to have to make some guesses as the reference to culture. Are we talking about transforming the culture of the Tukwila community, or are we talking about the culture of the police department?
I am going to assume that it's probably the culture of the police department, and policing. I would go with that question.
Okay. So as it relates to the culture of the police department, we've already seen a transformation over the last 27 years since I've been here. When I first got here, crime was nonstop. It was literally call to call, not giving us much chance really to engage with the community because it was simply just responding to calls. We've since grown. The environment has changed. We've worked with the community. We have literally seen the face of Tukwila change as it relates to growth in our business district, growth on Tukwila International Boulevard, growth in our residential areas. As it relates to how we would engage or address that culture, again, we've been changing as we go. That doesn't mean we're not done changing. Right now, again, the last year has shown us that we still have room for improvement in law enforcement. Tukwila has been on the front end of engaging with community and trying to meet their needs, but that doesn't mean we can't do better. So as we move forward, again, it takes that communication effort and displaying what we are doing to change that culture, talking with the community so that they have an understanding of what it is that we're doing and trying to meet the intent behind their requests and their needs.
Thank you. Major Bennett?
Yeah, the best answer I could come up for why are citizens called civilians or community members called civilians, I think there's just kind of a clear line of distinction within law enforcement and military. That there's commissioned law enforcement and civilians, the public that we serve, and same thing with military. There's military commission, and then civilians are the public we serve. So I think it's more just sort of the vernacular of commissioned or military versus non-commissioned. And then the culture, I believe the question was about the culture over the last 30 years that has been built. Can you repeat the second part of that question?
Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I figured I'd take myself on mute real quick. And how are you going to transform a culture that was created over the last 30 years?
Okay, and to really piggyback on what Interim Chief Deaver said, I think that in the last 30 years, there's been a huge cultural shift and the pendulum shift. Very different when I started in 1990. It's completely different as far as accountability, as far as the need and the desire and the ability to build trust, to engage the community, to really care about what the community thinks and says. Just within the last 10 or 15 years of our department, we changed all policies that we take all complaints, no matter, big or small, because we're going to log every single complaint, and we're going to make sure that there's accountability and transparency in what those complaints are. I think the biggest change is that I've seen police leaders and officers really engaged, wanting to engage, wanting to be present, and mostly wanting to listen. And I think it seemed like initially in law enforcement, it was, here we are, we're your police, you're going to do what we say. And that was really sort of the culture. And I think that has done a complete 180 where it's about engagement. What can we do for you? What do you expect of us? So I think that entrenched culture has just shifted dramatically, especially over the last 5 years.
Thank you. This question is for Chief Drever. Thank you very much, Chief Drever. In your presentation, you stated a renewed desire to hear from and engage with the youth in Tukwila, ensuring that they have an equal ability to provide input. What does that look like in practical terms for you?
Well, as stated before, we're looking to provide those opportunities for engagement so that we can listen and hear from the youth. First and foremost would be creating these forums like we're doing right now, where we can actually engage and talk openly about the issues at hand. Our school resource officers being in the schools have always been a liaison between the department and the youth, being able to capitalize on just being there and being present, making those relationships with the students, and being able to help not just with law enforcement aspects, but truly befriend the students and help them with their personal needs as well. We're also looking at, the city's looking at putting together an intergenerational center that would be able to address the needs of the youth. Here, just down the street somewhere, they're looking at putting it here on Tukwila International Boulevard and putting together programs not only there at the center, but here within the department, because we have community areas here in the department that can be used so that we can reach out to not just the youth, but the community as a whole.
Thank you. I'm going to take that since you had, we have a couple of questions on SROs, and so I would like to ask this question to both candidates, and we'll start with Major Bennett on this one. Many community members, especially our Black and Brown youth, have expressed concerns around having an armed school resource officer in our school communities. What is your perspective about the SRO position? How will you build, strengthen a relationship with our youth? Please share some specific outreach tactics you will use to engage youth communities that have been historically disenfranchised.
It's a fantastic question. I would say that there's a lot of debate and discussion currently happening with SROs. Right before I left my last city, there was a movement to remove SROs, or talk about removing SROs from the schools. And there was legislation that came out that mandated specific training for SROs. And so we engaged with the school district, the police department, and the city to sit down in a forum and a panel and to discuss what that would look like. What would it look like engaging in these this mandated new legislative training practices? What does the school want from us? They're also invited were many community members that were upset and didn't want armed law enforcement in the schools. They wanted they just basically didn't want law enforcement whatsoever near their youth. So I think in holding and hosting those forums and making them open forums to the community, we're able to answer a lot of questions. And a lot of it, I think, is also an education piece of the benefits of the SRO program, not only for safety on the school, but as a resource. And really, the SRO's school resource officer, it shouldn't be a punitive program. It should be a resource for students. I know when I ran our SRO program in Shoreline, we had SROs in 13 different schools, and I met with the principals and we talked about curriculum and what they want, what each principal wanted and what they didn't want. And so specific to the schools, I think that communication and collaboration is really important. But having said that, I think it's up to the community and the school. If we need to ask what's wanted, what is expected of us, and if it's non-uniformed, but carrying a weapon, which is something that we're mandated to do, then maybe that's something we can discuss. If it's about engaging in youth programs, in my previous experience, we engaged in a police athletic league or activities league where we played flag football with the youth. We had barbells and badges where we did weightlifting programs with the youth. So there are a lot of ways to engage with the youth. I think that one of the biggest ways, though, was hosting a youth panel and really listening to what the youth had to say about their experiences within the community, what they experienced within the police department. And I think in addressing specific outreach tactics for disenfranchised youth, it's important to be available and open and seize that opportunity to have those discussions and build forums and platforms where those discussions can occur. So my perspective personally on the School Resource Officer Program, I think it's a fantastic program. I was an SRO in the mid-90s. I think education is important, and I think it's an important opportunity to build collaboration between our youth and the law enforcement officer that's working in our schools.
Thank you, Major Bennett. Chief Reaver.
Yeah, so my perspective is exactly the same. It is a critical function for our engagement with the youth, having our school resource officers there. As to them being armed, one of the original reasons for putting law enforcement in the schools was because of, at the time, an uptick in school shootings, and having somebody there to immediately respond to that. They're not armed and in there to deal with day-to-day, somebody stole this out of my locker. That's what school security is for. That's what the school deals with. The intent for officers being in that school is for the protection of the students and being able to have somebody immediately respond to any threat that may come to the school. That being said, over the years, departments have capitalized on the fact that we have an officer in the school to build those relationships. I can't tell you how many times we've received attaboys and just loving comments of our school resource officers because of the relationships they've built with the students. Currently, right now, I've been working with Dr. Herndon, our school superintendent for the Tukwila School District, about the very conversation of whether or not we have school resource officers in our schools. The reason we're having that conversation is, as Major Bennett had pointed out, there's been some narrative about wanting to remove school resource officers from schools. We had that here in Tukwila as well. Unfortunately, this all happened right at the same time that COVID hit. And so the conversation has died down, and I don't know that it's specifically because there's no interest in the conversation. I still believe there is. It's just we haven't had our kids in schools to be able to even consider whether or not school resource officers should be there with them. That being said, we need to be able to facilitate those conversations, working with the stakeholders. In this case, not only the schools, but the students, the families of those students, the officers in this department, the city and its administration as it relates to how it can best meet the needs of the students. The majority of the information that we receive is that the school resource officers are wanted, but there are a few that, for whatever reason, are concerned about having an armed officer in the school. We need to engage those individuals and provide them an opportunity to talk with us so that we can understand where that fear comes from. Because if it's something we're doing that is creating that fear, we need to address it and provide for an opportunity for the community to speak to us, the youth to speak to us about that. So as it stands historically here in the city, we've had a good relationship with the schools. Our school resource officers on a monthly basis are asking me, Chief, when can we get back? They want to engage with the students. They want to be able to be there for them. And so as school starts getting spun up and putting our students back into the schools, we'll be engaging the school, we'll be engaging the students on what it looks like in our interactions with our school resource officers.
Thank you, Major Bennett and Chief Drever. I'm going to stay on the same subject. We have a similar question that was asked by a community member that I would like to ask you all to see if there is maybe a little more expanding on this with the youth and the school resource officer. And we'll start this question in reverse order. So Chief Drever, you'll answer first, and then Major Bennett second, please. This past spring, we had community forums with local leaders in which Foster High School students and families asked that the CSO, so I'm assuming it's the school resource officer, be removed from the high school, that the police get called and respond from down the street if there was an emergency. The students asked the former chief if the school resource officer was staying on the premise in a non-emergency reason to not be weaponized or have a weapon concealed. The student asked that the CSOs do not dress in full uniform. The students requested that instead of school resource officers of the community, provide social support counselors or community members who can support the students. The students shared concerns about profiling and bias and criminalizing students and the school, or at the school. How would you respond to the student or to these student or family issues? Do you plan on having the CSO position return to Foster once the students return to the school buildings? And how would you respond to these community concerns from students and families? I know it's a long question. I think you guys, can you guys see the question just to, next to you, just, I have it highlighted. I don't know if you can see it highlighted there, but obviously, okay. If you have any questions, please let me know and we can repeat the question. So again, Chief Drever, please.
As it relates to whether or not the SROs be removed or not, Chief Linton, the prior chief, was involved in that engagement. When he left, I picked up the discussions with Superintendent Herndon. However, by then, school wasn't in session, and I didn't have an opportunity to directly interact with the individuals that were bringing up these concerns. For now, my plan would be to be able to get school resource officers back into the schools so that we can continue that engagement with the youth. Now, that being said, before we do so, I'd like to interact with Teens for Tukwila, the school representation, the youth leadership from the school, so that we can discuss what that looks like. There's probably not a situation where I would have somebody who's identified as a police officer walking around unarmed. It's not practical, it's not safe, but there are ways that we can engage that minimize the impact of the presence of a gun or the presence of the uniform. You mentioned the uniform and a concern about it being full uniform. We can make accommodations there. We can potentially dress them in a manner that is less threatening than a uniform. We can also potentially hide the fact that they're carrying a gun. We could do it concealed. However, the bottom line is that they are still police officers and they still need to be able to perform the functions of a police officer, whether it's on school property or not, because we also have school resource officers that are called from the school to deal with incidents that are going on nearby simply because they're closest. They need to be able to interact and engage and protect the community at whatever level that particular incident requires. As it relates to criminalizing the students, I cannot think of one incident in our school district during the time that I've been here where we've had an incident where we could say that a law enforcement officer with this department had criminalized somebody there at the school. Again, that's not what they're there for. They're there as support. They're there to interact with the students, be there as a liaison so that they can provide a better understanding of the department to the students. And if we need to work on that because there's a perception otherwise, then that's some of that engagement that needs to take place. And we need to create those forums where we can openly talk about those things so that we can best meet the needs of those students.
Thank you, Chief Drever. Major Bennett?
So I agree with what Chief Drever has said. I think the thing I would want to know most, and maybe coming from that I'm not within the department when this all happened, I want to hear the concerns or how we got here in the first place. What were the concerns of students or parents or the school district? What brought us to the asking of this CSO to be removed from the high school. What were the specific incidents, and is there clarity or explanation or education that needs to occur surrounding these incidents? So that would probably be one of the first things that I would look at, is to engage students, the student body, and the school, and parents as well, to ask what the issues are and have that open dialogue. As far as the uniform, I think, as Chief Drever said, there's soft uniforms. We use soft uniforms with a lot of our SROs, and soft is just basically a different, like a polo shirt and pants. We can also conceal weapons, as he said, if it's threatening. But what I will say, and I don't want to repeat everything that he said, and I agree with the things that Interim Chief Drever said, I will say that as a parent with 4 students in different schools, I can't think of anything more that I'd want than to keep my kids safe. And I think utilizing resources of having a law enforcement officer on site, should there be an emergency event or something like a school shooting or an armed perpetrator on campus, you want the quickest response to save those children, to be available immediately should there be a threat at the school. And I think that was the driving reason, besides the education piece, which was important, of having law enforcement in the first place. Having traveled to a number of different countries, some of the schools have 24/7 armed, almost military personnel and officers with barbed wire and gates standing around the school, because they're protecting their greatest interests, which are their children. I'm not advocating for that in Tequila or in the United States, but what I'm advocating for is that safety piece of having someone available should there be an incident. And in addition to that, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for engagement and education and building of trust. I think we're missing that opportunity by not having officers there. So in sum, it's important to hear what the concerns are and how we might be able to address those. And it's important that everybody wants us there, because if the school doesn't want us there, or the students don't want us there, or the city doesn't want us there, then it's difficult to be there. But we're still going to have to respond when there's an incident. And that's also a resource issue, is that the most effective use of our resources to have somebody, responding in and out to the school versus having someone that's familiar with the school that's already there and that is a phone call away and down the hallway. So all that to say, I'm supportive of the program. I think it's important to have open dialogue and to make the best assessment and decision for the program moving forward.
Thank you. Give me a quick second to reorientate myself here for the next question. This will be a question for both candidates, and we will start with you, Major Bennett, and then move over to Chief Drever. What practices are in place, or will you put in place, to prevent racist practices in Tequila policing, i.e. racial profiling, use of excessive force on Black and Brown community members, treating Black and Brown community members as if they are not to be protected and served, etc.? Consequently, what accountability measures will be taken when racist practices do occur?
I'm trying to call the question up here. Okay, so I think both of us, talked about this in our presentations. I think there's keys in policy, the 8 can't wait, making sure everything's compliant, making sure we have the appropriate education and training for our officers with crisis intervention training, bias training, microaggressions, all of the other types of training that we currently have and that we can currently expand upon. So those are the looking at the best practices for those programs is important for making sure we don't have racial profiling, to make sure we understand our use of force policies and how those have changed, to understand alternatives to the use of force. In the academy, even we had to memorize necessary as it related to force, that no reasonable alternative to the use of force appeared to exist, and the amount of force used was reasonable to effect the lawful purpose intended. And I don't think that has changed from today. I think that we have to be open, we have to be honest, we have to be transparent, we have to be accountable, and we have to build trust within the community. And I think everyone should be served equally within the community and treated equally in that social justice and equity. So if that's not happening, for the accountability measures, we have to act with that accountability in mind. We have to follow our policies and procedures. We have to hold people accountable when they aren't following those practices and procedures. And we need to make sure we're researching and implementing alternatives to the way we've traditionally done policing, to make some of that racial justice and equity, and to not disproportionately affect lower income communities or other communities that really are searching for ways to trust the police. So I think we have an opportunity here to really reinvent and reimagine how we do policing, and to look at alternative programs to build trust and to make equity something that's tangible within our communities and in the relationship to the police department.
Thank you, Major Bennett. Chief Drever?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what Major Bennett said, and I'd like to build on that with the processes and policies that we already have in place to address these types of things, working with the region and state on bringing in transparency and accountability into the fold. The ABLE program I talked about, which really gets towards officer and peer intervention when these types of things take place. That whole program is built around creating a culture within our police organization so that it becomes second nature to not only stop, but identify when these things are happening so that we can react and hold people accountable. And you asked consequently what accountability measures will be taken when racist practices do occur. Those people will not work for this community anymore. It's that simple. This community deserves the best. This community is currently getting the best. However, if we should see somebody that's not providing that best service to this community, we will address it promptly and swiftly because you deserve better. As it relates to providing that transparency, is we are putting community members on our use of force review board so that we can actually have a community member involved with vetting the use of force that we do use. So if there is excessive force on anybody, regardless of the color of their skin, our community members are seeing every single use of force, or I should say a representative of the community, so that we have that transparency and the community can trust in the fact that we are addressing those issues when it comes up.
Thank you, Chief Drever and Major Bennett. So this question is for both of you all as well, and I believe it's Chief Drever's turn to stay on and start this one. I've lost track. We'll start over again. So you'll go first on this one, Chief Drever. In a small city very close to Tukwila, the police chief had a standing goal for the department. It was, we don't let the little crimes happen so the big one can't happen. That city aggressively enforced its laws and had a very low crime rate. Do you agree with this approach? If not, how will you address the crimes that are very common in Tukwila? Home break-ins, shoplifting, speeding, drug dealing, end use, and etc. Thank you for your response.
Well, I guess it depends on the definition of aggressively enforce. The way I interpret that, or the way I've heard that interpreted in the past, is basically you're arresting everybody for every little thing. In which case we then don't take into consideration the opportunity for diversion, the opportunity of addressing first-time criminals, people engaging in crime for the first time, being able to educate them and providing them with an opportunity to learn from their mistake and keeping them out of the criminal justice system. So although I agree with the thought of we need to address every crime in the city, I don't know that I would refer to it as aggressively enforce. Instead, I would refer to it as aggressively engage so that we can accommodate the needs of those that the crimes are happening to, while at the same time we can address, potentially reform, find recidivism for the individuals that are actually conducting the crime. Recently in Tukwila, we've had concerns about property crimes, people stealing from their yard, people prowling residences. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing so that we can help as a partnership with the community is educate the community. Right now, looking to put things on social media. This is what you can do to limit your chances of being a victim of X, Y, or Z crime. These are things that you can do to engage so that you help the police department when these crimes are happening so that we can work towards stopping it, as well as putting together communication platforms that get the word out so that those that are prolific criminals get the word that we will come down hard on somebody that is a repeat offender and somebody that has chosen crime as a life of crime, not simply just making a mistake here or there. So it's important for us, again, to have that relationship with the community so they tell us of what is going on so that we can have that aggressive engagement. So if that is what you're referencing as it relates to aggressively enforcing laws, I would say yes. However, if it's the latter where you, or the previous where they are just somebody jaywalks, you write them a ticket. There needs to be forgiveness. There needs to be an educational approach to the way that we do law enforcement. The intent behind law enforcement is to change the behavior of the individuals that are not following the rules of society. And we need to be creative about how we go about doing that so that we don't inadvertently put somebody in the criminal justice system that would then impact the rest of their life. Now, as it compares to somebody who's been in the criminal justice system and continues to still make those choices to be malicious towards this community, then yeah, that it would be an aggressively enforced situation.
Thank you, Chief Driver. Major Bennett.
I agree with everything that our Chief Driver is saying, and I don't want to repeat the things he said. But what I want to add is, I think what we're talking about here is the broken windows theory, which is basically you have a broken window, you leave it, another one's broken, and then another one's broken, and then there's graffiti, and then it just continues and continues and continues. And so in addressing that, when you say aggressively enforcing laws, I think you don't let the broken window theory continue. I think you aggressively engage, I like that terminology, within that community to prevent that crime from spreading further. And part of that is having built those community relations and trust so that you're receiving those reports and that you know the people to contact to help address what the problems are. In one of the communities I worked in as chief, we started a problem-solving team. That's what we call them, problem-solving team. And so it was a group of detectives that went out and addressed just those specific problems to a specific area so that we didn't have the broken windows occur. And a lot of that is that education and prevention piece, as Eric said. And I think I really like too the piece on discretion. I mean, what is the goal? The goal is for everyone to be safe. That's the role of why we're there. We need to redefine and re-articulate and get permission again, really truly, for the role that we were chartered by the community to take on. So we have to have agreement in what that role is. And I think all crime stems from two things: desire and opportunity. And I think education and prevention programs can address some of the desire pieces. But we in law enforcement, our greatest kind of bang for the buck is that opportunity piece. So how do we do this education where we have social media, where we've engaged different community groups, where we've implemented block or business watches or done crime prevention through environmental design types of analysis. So there's just so many programs out there to address how we can help stem opportunity. And so to answer your question in the end, I think that we have to address those obviously home break-ins and the shoplifting and the speeding and drug dealing and use. And these are community concerns, but I think we need to do it with a lens of the goal of compliance and equitably. So that would be my answer to that question.
Thank you, Major Bennett. And we do have a follow-on question, I believe, from the SRO conversation earlier. And so this will be for both of y'all as well. We'll start with Major Bennett. There's a take on not carrying firearms by police officers as being considered unsafe. And so how does that reconcile, or how do you reconcile that with 19 countries worldwide where police do not regularly carry firearms?
I think that's a great question. I've spent a lot of time visiting other countries. I spent a lot of time in other countries. And I think something we must take into account with those other countries is many of those countries have very strict gun laws. So when you combine strict gun laws with the police not carrying guns, that can marry itself a little bit better. in some of the communities where they haven't had access, I know in Britain for a while, in order to get a gun, you had to go back to the locker, check one out, and take it into the community. That's not going to help you in the middle of an emergent situation. So I think it would be fantastic if there wasn't a need to carry a gun. That we don't have the type of strict gun laws that some of those communities have, and I would never want to be put in a position where we can't effectively provide intervention to protect someone else's life because we didn't have the tools necessary to do that.
Thank you, Major Bennett. Chief Drever?
Yeah, a lot of respect to the Major. I really don't know how I can add to that. Right now in our country, we also don't have a culture that provides for law enforcement not being armed because of the lack of gun control, and not so much lack of gun control, but just how readily accessible guns are to individuals that mean to do harm. And as soon as a law enforcement officer is identified as a law enforcement officer, they become a target. And so they need the ability to not only protect themselves, but those that are around them. And getting back to the original intent behind why officers were put in schools and being armed was to be able to provide that immediate response. Just think of what seconds of delay could do for an active shooter. An active shooter is not just simply somebody fires a gun once. They are actively hunting and looking to do harm to the individuals in that school. And every second of delay means another student could or teacher or anybody in that building could potentially lose their life. So again, getting back to the original intent behind why we put officers in there. If we think that we no longer have an issue with the potential of active shooter scenarios in our schools, then I think we have a different story there, but I don't think we're there yet.
I'd like to just add a piece to that because it struck me when you were speaking that Secret Service did a study, and there's many widespread longitudinal studies and studies that have looked at school shootings over the course of the last 20 years. And what was found in the vast majority of cases is the school shooting stopped as soon as the first law enforcement officer arrived, was seen, or was heard. So that's an important piece of that, as Interim Chief Drever was saying, is that presence is so important. If that's what stops the shooting, why do we want to have a 5 or 10 minute response? So anyway, I just wanted to add to that piece. Thank you.
Thank you both. Question for both, and I believe Chief Drever, you're on to go first this time. Is how do you think individual officers can take responsibility for building trust in day-to-day interactions?
Well, we're doing that right now. It was 3 weeks ago that I engaged our department leadership, which is our sergeants on up to the chief's office, and asking for creative ways for us to engage on a day-to-day basis with the community. So this very question got asked of our groups, and it's amazing some of the creative ways that they've come up with, ways for us to engage and build that trust. But the bottom line comes down to this department, especially over the last year, and taking into consideration COVID and social distancing, we have not had as many interactions as we would normally have because of the fear of contracting disease and being told to limit our engagements. We're now taking a full swing the other way. Now that it appears that there may be a handle on the epidemic, or the pandemic, excuse me, and we are providing personal protective equipment for our officers that are out in the community. So finding ways to then re-engage. And it begins with just getting out of the car and talking. It really is that simple. Being able to know your community. Our community should not be able to go any extended period of time without talking with an officer, and not for the reason of them calling them there. Businesses, schools, our residents, all of them should be able to name an officer. Our officers have assigned districts. Our geographical area is really not that big. And so if we get out and we see people, stop and talk to them. That's the beginning of that trust. And then furthermore, following up on those discussions. If a community member has a question or has a concern, if you can't answer it immediately, finding the answer for them and getting back to them. That's what builds those trusts, doing what we say and saying what we do, and making sure that we are having that engagement and the communication. It came up in both Major Bennett and my presentation. The key falls down to building that trust, is working on those relationships, and the only way you can work on a relationship is by communicating, talking with somebody, getting to know them, not just simply taking a few minutes of your time, but actually listening and understanding, empathizing with that person, wanting to meet their needs and trying to do better by them.
Thank you, Chief Drever. Major Bennett, have you had a chance to answer that question? I'm sorry.
Nope. I will now.
You're up. Yeah, I'll say what I was going to say after.
It's good. I don't, again, want to repeat the same exact things. That I agree with everything that Interim Chief Drever has said. The things I would add, though, are it starts at the top, and I think the leadership models the expectation and the culture of the department. And so individual officers taking responsibility for building trust in day-to-day interactions, that's modeled by your leadership, that's modeled by your chief, that's modeled in your ethos, that's modeled in your policies and your goal setting. And I think that naturally then flows into the community, and that piece of being present and being available and being willing to show up to different events, to show up at panels and forums. I think those are some of the ways that we build that trust, and that basically the legitimacy of why we're there in our day-to-day interactions. I know when I started the department, again, this was 1990, 91, out on patrol, I can remember one of the peer officers, well, I was new, I was a recruit, but one of the officers that had been there a few years, we were talking at a call, and this officer said, well, you know, when I don't have a 911 call to go to, let me show you all the places where I hide behind a building until I get the next call, because I don't want to talk to citizens. Now, granted, this is like 30 years ago, but I remember at the time thinking, what? Isn't that why? That's why we're here. We're supposed to be out and about engaging and being present, and whether it's a deterrent or it's just a friendly hi or having a conversation. So again, I think modeling from the top and being open and out and willing to engage whenever possible, and instilling that too in the department is how we can take that responsibility.
Thank you, Major Bennett and Chief Drever. And I want to say that we are over time right now, but I believe that we're going to ask 2 more questions that were geared towards both candidates. I do apologize if we don't get to all the questions today. I'm trying to see which ones are, haven't been necessarily touched around yet. But I think that I have one right here where we'll start, and I'll start with you, Major Bennett, and then we'll move to Chief Drever. How do you feel about the need for non-physical intervention? How important is diversity in the Tukwila Police Force? How do you suggest on improving the diversity if you feel it's needed? How have you been able to address language barriers in your work? Or how would you address language barriers when you are responding to a call? And thank you. You're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Thankfully, the question's up here as there's multiple parts to this question. So how do I feel about the need for non-physical intervention? I think less than lethal force or crisis intervention training is key. I've certainly in my career been in positions where, lethal force probably could have been used, but there were alternatives available. And those were alternatives that I chose to take. And I think that we need to train others to be able to, whenever possible, utilize non-lethal or non-physical intervention. And a lot of that's diffusing and crisis intervention training and honestly, embedding with mental health professionals and some of the other things that we've talked about today. I think diversity in the Tukwila Police Force is very important. I think we need to represent the community we serve. As part of, for many years, the diversity recruiting team for the King County Sheriff's Office, I worked a lot leading the diversity recruiting team and finding methodologies to to recruit more diverse candidates, including going to cultural job fairs, to the Women's Law Enforcement Network, putting on a seminar where over 500 women showed up, and we talked about, we had a panel for female chiefs within the agency who answered questions from attendees. We talked about advertising in publications that were non-English speaking. We went to a lot of community college fairs. So we basically were trying to cull any possible methodology to recruit a more diverse culture into our police departments. I even did a seminar with another officer to the Indian Association of Western Washington, which was Punjabi East Indian females, and it was kind of interesting at the very end. Their comment was, well, I really appreciate your presentation, but I'm a scientist, or it was interesting, just trying to please come and work in law enforcement, the law enforcement profession. So I think there's a lot of diversity that we can do outreach for, and there's a lot of different methodologies to do that. And luckily, I've had the joy of being able to do that for many years. How have you been able to address language barriers in our work, or how would you address language barriers when going to a call? So working with the school district and working downtown and working with these surveys for communities, we utilize a language bank to and different language services to translate some of these documents into a variety of languages. And when we're out and about on patrol at a call, we have the language bank or the language line that we're actually able to call to do the translation for us in a call. I actually used this about a year and a half ago with in a high-risk stop with a person that didn't speak English. So they're very quick and efficient in getting back to helping and translating during those calls. So I think that answered all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Major Bennett. Chief Drever.
Oh, certainly. So how do you feel about the need for non-physical intervention? Well, it's a critical need. That's why we train in it. Matter of fact, we have been training in de-escalation and crisis intervention for religiously now for about 3 years. We touched on it a little bit before that, but we saw the need, and before mandates from the state came down, we truly engaged. And we pride ourselves on our critical incident training and our de-escalation training that provides us the tools for us to be able to take a non-physical intervention. And it's shown. Our department in the last 2 years, since 2018, our use of force has gone down by almost 40%. I directly correlate that to the fact that we are utilizing non-physical intervention, and even more so, doing everything we can from a non-physical intervention and exhausting those possibilities before we have to utilize physical intervention. Now, most situations are dynamic, and sometimes there is a need to immediately engage in a physical intervention. But now, with the training and, quite honestly, the professionalism of the members of this department, we rely more on non-physical intervention and really communicating and trying to understand what is causing the issues at hand with the individuals involved, so that we can have a peaceful and non-physical ending. As it relates to how important diversity is in the Tukwila Police Force, well, Tukwila is one of the most diverse cities in the country, so it's critical. Fortunately for us, we're already meeting those diversity goals. The Tukwila census put us at about 17% for Black Americans. The department's currently at about 16%. Where we're actually lacking as it relates to our diversity is female officers in law enforcement, and that's not just Tukwila, that's across the nation. There's many things that attribute to that, but right now that is the hardest demographic for us to be able to fill. We're also short on Asian and Hispanic backgrounds for our diversity. So we work on that as it relates to our hiring practices, and we try and target marketing so that we can try and fill that diversity. Now for Tukwila, there's just literally no way that we'll be able to meet 130 different languages as it relates to a diversity. That's why it's more important as it relates to educating our officers to the cultural backgrounds, the ethnic backgrounds of the individuals in our community so that they can better relate. As it relates to addressing language barriers, well, we've got plenty of them, as we just mentioned here in the city. We have tools and resources. We have Language Line. We have officers that speak different languages, and we utilize them whenever we can. Preferably somebody that actually speaks the language so that we can have that one-on-one interaction. However, that's not always available, in which case we have access to language lines. Not to mention we've given the officers opportunities to use translation on their phones. So there are apps that allow you to actually converse with somebody, at least on the very basic level, so you can begin to understand what their needs are and or understand what language that they're utilizing so that you can get the right resource.
Thank you both for your thorough answers on that one. So we have time for one more question. And so the question is, and we'll start with you, Chief Drever. What are your views or approach to promoting the concept of community-oriented policing throughout all the sections of the police department?
Well, that actually keys off of the previous question where I mentioned in the last 3 weeks, we've been working with the individual units, individual members of this department to seek out that community engagement. That is community-oriented policing, involving the community in a partnership for being able to address their needs as a community. So we have individual units, take for instance our major crimes unit, which typically does follow-up work for felony crimes. However, they're looking at putting together an educational piece so they can put together a forum and reach out to the community and educate them on felony crimes, burglary, the thefts that we talk about from the houses. We've asked individual units to and individual officers to get creative, and we're still in that process. So those ideas are still forthcoming. However, it again falls back to the engagement with the community and creating those forums so that our officers can hear from the community themselves as to how they want us engaging with them. And then creating those relationships so that we can further and best meet their needs.
Thank you, Chief Drever. Major Bennett? You're still on mute. It's okay. I do it all the time.
Sorry, and it was kind of funny. I said, sorry. I said, ditto everything Chief Drever said. I've been fortunate enough over the last many years to, for about 17 years, I taught community-oriented policing and problem solving at various colleges and universities, and I also taught the community policing block for the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center. So at our police academy, so community policing is, I kind of eat and breathe it as a philosophy and as a strategy, and I think it's extremely effective. I think just in looking at a problem analysis triangle, you have your location, your offender, your victim, and the crime itself. And if you can remove one of those things, the offender, the victim, or the location, you're able to prevent crime. And so that's what community-oriented policing is addressing the problem at its core. If it's location, how do we alter the location or make the location safer? How do we take the suspect or prevent the suspect from being there or take them off the street? And how do we empower the victim not to be a victim or to be in a place where they're victimized or to provide safety for their belongings or themselves? So looking at community-oriented policing and problem solving and that problem-oriented policing, it's really moving away from a Band-Aid approach of just responding. We had a motel years ago that was just so much crime in this hotel. We spent so much time responding there. And, we just keep taking, responding and taking reports and responding, and then people go to jail and there be warrants. And it was like, what are we doing? This isn't effective. It's a Band-Aid approach over and over again. And so eventually, and this is in the early 90s, we talked to the motel manager and built a relationship, and new management then came in, and then it became sort of a cottage, and all the crime went away. And so that was that problem-oriented policing of getting to the core of the location and changing the rules along that location, becoming a guardian of intervention. So my view of approaching and promoting the concept of community-oriented policing is eating, living, and breathing it, and modeling it, and becoming that mentor throughout the department for this is our goal, this is our mission, this is what we do.
Thank you very much. Your answers, Major Bennett and Chief Drever. I want to take this time to thank the community members that have attended today's town hall presentation and Q&A. These were amazing questions, really good questions. I also want to thank the candidates for their time today to present themselves to the community. With that, I just want to wish everybody a good evening. Stay safe out there. And if there's any questions that are needed, please reach out to myself. I never introduced myself. I'm Juan Padilla. I'm the HR director. I do apologize. To myself, the information is on our recruiting page. If you need to get a hold of me, please send me an email. Again, thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.